There's that sound. There we go.
Gabby Lynch loves hearing the squish squish of wet ground sucking at her boots.
Look at this big mound. That's awesome.
Touching wild carpets of sphagnum moss.
It's like a sponge. It traps and holds water. If we were in the middle of a drought, we could come out here and the tops of the sphagnum would be dried out and brown and kind of crunchy looking. But if you stuck your fingers down into the bottom of the mound, it would be perfectly cool and wonderful and damp.
And taking in the rich beauty of wildflowers.
Oh, look, there's cardinal flower. It's one of my favorites. This is a beautiful site for wildflowers like ironweed and joe pye weed.
Not long ago, Gabby wouldn't have been able to enjoy any of this. It didn't exist.
In Shady Valley, channelization and draining of wetlands was a very popular activity in the mid-1900s. A wetland or a bog were just seen as useless land. So by the early 60s, almost all of the streams on the floor of Shady Valley had been channelized and straightened.
As a result, nearly 1,000 acres of wetlands were drained and turned into marginal farmland. It stayed that way until 2011, when the Nature Conservancy fired up these machines in an attempt to turn back the hands of time, reshaping a straightened stream into a meandering brook that would let water soak back into the soil and allow nature to reclaim the land.
The vegetation from the wetlands were still there in seed form in the ground. Once it just got a little bit more damp, that seed bank just came up. Within 6 months of finishing the digging, we had a wetland with native vegetation coming back.
The result is spectacular. Parts of the channelized stream have been transformed into deep water areas for waterfowl. Shrubs have been planted along the restored stream, which is now connected to the wetland, helping keep water clean.
If you have a flood event, the water can flow out of the banks into the neighboring wetland, and the wetland can just dissipate everything. It can absorb all of the nutrients, it can absorb all the toxins. The wetland works like a big scrubber.
Although this lush wetland lies on a valley floor, it is actually a mountain bog, nestled 2,800 feet above sea level among the southern Appalachians.
There is no other place in the whole state of Tennessee that is quite like Shady Valley. The elevation has helped shape the really interesting plants and animals that are here, like cranberries and cotton grass.
And a tiny terrapin called the bog turtle. Once plentiful in the valley, the turtles almost disappeared when the wetlands were drained.
They're tiny and they burrow. They want a very specific habitat, and there's not a lot of that habitat.
Douglas Rice is a researcher with the Knoxville Zoo. Today, he's searching for juvenile bog turtles.
It's kind of a needle in a haystack a little bit if you gave the needle legs.
The turtles are tracked by transmitters attached to their shell, but that doesn't necessarily make them easy to locate.
Moved on me. Because they spend 90% of their time in the mud, they're really hard to find. There you are.
The zoo has been collecting data on the bog turtle since 1986, trying to find ways to help this endangered species survive.
We're doing this to make sure the populations can sustain themselves. We're looking at a lot of different things, kind of how they move, how they use the habitat, the factors that induce large moves, because these guys are very tiny, and so them moving any considerable distance is hard work for them.
While researchers aren't really sure whether or not these little guys have started making their way into the newly restored portion of the preserve, most likely they won't start living there for some time. That's because even though it looks like a bog and acts like a bog, it's still missing some key components of an established bog.
The surface of the ground is still a little bit hard-packed from all of the many decades of farming and plowing. So this would be a great place for bog turtles to forage, but it's not suitable yet for a nesting area or a hibernating area, which requires that very, very well-formed, deep, sphagnum moss, peaty kind of substrate.
While the turtles might not have discovered the restored wetland just yet, people sure have. Doris and James Ratchford traveled here from North Carolina.
It is one of our favorite spots. We like to come to Tennessee to bird. You seem to have a bit more water. We don't have a lot of bogs. So it attracts a different kind of birds that we don't normally see.
We really encourage people to come out here and bird watch and pick blackberries and go hiking with their families, because you can't come on this site and just not be struck by how special and beautiful it is.
One visitor that is not welcome is this reed canary grass, an invasive plant that creates a thick mat of vegetation, choking out native plants.
It doesn't allow sunlight and nutrients and things to get to the good plants that we want.
To fight the canary grass, fences have been put up to allow cattle to graze sections of the wetlands.
They not only eat the early growth on the reed canary grass in the spring, but their hooves can trample and break up that mat of vegetation.
It will take time to see just how effective the cattle grazing will be. But as Gabby and Doug know, time is a key component to restoring wetland bogs and helping tiny turtles.
They're hard to restore, especially to the level to which these turtles need the right mix of water and mud and plant species.
It's going to be a very, very long-term thing to measure what the bog turtle population is doing. Our goal is to try to bring back enough functioning wetland habitat that they can use to travel and to forage for food. It's not so much a goal specific to the bog turtle as one species, but really bringing back the entire wetland ecosystem on which the bog turtle, but a lot of other things depend too.
Including people.
They are protecting our lands and our environment for my grandson and what other future grandchildren I might have.
I'm Ken Tucker on the Wild Side.